24,000 shipping containers, stacked 12 stories above the waterline on a steel hull longer than the Empire State Building is tall, and the thing floats. It crosses oceans through hurricanes, waves the size of two-story houses, and currents strong enough to drag oil rigs sideways across the map. It carries the contents of an entire city: your phone, your shoes, your couch, the coffee in your kitchen, all moving at the same time across thousands of miles of open salt water. So how does a steel box the size of a small town stay upright on the surface of the sea? Why doesn't the top row of containers just slide off the moment the ship leans into a wave? What happens when one of these things hits a real storm in the middle of the North Atlantic in January? And here is the part that will quietly change how you look at every cargo ship photo for the rest of your life. These ships are not built to resist the ocean. They are built to agree with it. First, let us clear up the assumption almost everyone walks in carrying. Most people picture a container ship as a rigid steel rectangle, solid, stiff, a floating warehouse that refuses to move under any condition the weather throws at it. That image is wrong in a fundamental way. A modern container ship is engineered to flex along its entire length. In heavy seas off the coast of Newfoundland or rounding the southern tip of Africa, the bow and the stern of one of these ships can bend several feet relative to the middle of the hull. Stand on the bridge during a storm, look down the length of the deck toward the front of the ship, and you can actually see the deck twist along its own spine. The forward containers will lean one way while the stern leans the other way at the same time. Think of a fly fishing rod loaded with a heavy fish on the line. Rigid rods would snap clean in half. Flexible rods bend, absorb the load, and survive the fight every single time. That is exactly what a container ship's hull is doing every minute it spends at sea in rough water. If the hull were welded into a single inflexible block, the first big wave off Cape Horn would crack it open like a dropped dinner plate hitting a tile floor. Engineers do not fight that force. They design steel that bends and returns over and over for 30 years of continuous service life on the open ocean. But flexing is only half the story of how this works. Now let's talk about loading, because this is where the real engineering brain trust quietly shows up. Walk through the Port of Rotterdam or the Port of Shanghai at 3 in the morning. The cranes are running under massive floodlights. Trucks are arriving every 40 seconds, headlights cutting through the harbor fog. Containers are being lifted off the dock and dropped into precise slots on the deck of the ship. This is not improvisation. This is choreography on a scale that defies belief. Every single container has a known weight written into a database long before it ever arrives at the port gate. Before the ship even arrives, a computer has already assigned every box to one specific location on the deck. The heaviest containers go low and toward the center of the hull. The lightest go on top and near the edges. It is a giant game of Tetris, but the stakes are the stability of a vessel worth $200 million and the cargo of an entire city. Here is where the scale gets unreasonable. A single fully loaded 40-foot container can weigh up to 66,000 pounds. That is roughly the weight of a full-sized city bus packed wall-to-wall with passengers. A modern, ultra-large container ship carries 24,000 of these boxes at once. Picture 24,000 city buses, stacked 12 high in long rows, floating quietly across the Indian Ocean at 22 miles per hour. The whole stack is locked together with steel devices called twist locks. They engage automatically when one container is lowered onto another, clicking into the corner castings like a giant deadbolt sliding home. Then, thick steel lashing rods are tensioned from the deck up to the second tier, pulling the whole stack tight, almost like the rigging on a sailboat, but heavier than a car. The containers are not really sitting on the deck. They are bound to the ship as a single welded-together mass of steel and cargo. But what actually keeps the ship upright in the water through all of this? Down in the bottom of the hull, far below the waterline, there are enormous tanks. They are called ballast tanks. They are filled with millions of gallons of seawater pumped in from outside the ship. The crew pumps that water in and out depending on how the ship is loaded for each particular voyage. The point of all that water is to lower the ship's center of gravity. The ship is bottom-heavy on purpose, by deliberate design. Think of one of those weighted bobbers a kid uses to fish in a quiet pond. Push it sideways with your finger, and it always wants to pop back upright, because the heaviest part is at the very bottom, and gravity does the rest of the work. A container ship works exactly the same way at sea every single day. When wind catches the stack of boxes and pushes the ship into a lean, the weight of all that ballast water down low creates a restoring force that rotates the ship back toward vertical. The taller the stack of containers above, the more ballast water you need below to keep the whole arrangement stable. Height on top, weight below. Here is the part that defies intuition completely. These ships sit way deeper in the water than most people standing on a dock ever realize. From the shore, you see 12 stories of steel above the waterline, but there are another 50 to 60 feet of hull hidden underwater, full of fuel, ballast, machinery, and cargo holds packed with containers nobody on shore can see from any angle. The visible part is the tip of the iceberg. The invisible part is what is actually doing the work. Now here's the pattern interrupt. Nobody expects when they first think about this. These ships do not really steer the way you think either. Turning a ship the length of 4 football fields takes miles of open water just to complete. The captain does not make a sharp turn at the last moment. He starts the turn maybe 2 miles before he actually needs to be pointed in the new direction. Course corrections happen at the speed of glaciers grinding across stone, and the bigger the ship, the slower it responds to the rudder. The largest container ships in the world physically cannot stop in less than several miles, even with engines slammed into full reverse at maximum power. Before we get to where this engineering came from, take a second to picture the world without it. Go back to 1955. Loading a cargo ship at any major port took an army of men, sometimes hundreds of them, hauling sacks of coffee, barrels of oil, crates of machinery, one piece at a time, by hand and by crane hook. A ship could sit in port for a full week or more, being loaded slowly by sweating dock workers. The cost of moving goods across an ocean was so brutally high that most products simply did not travel between continents at all. Then, on April 26, 1956, a former trucking company owner named Malcolm McLean loaded 58 metal boxes onto a converted tanker called the Ideal X in the port of Newark, New Jersey. The boxes were all the exact same size. They could be lifted directly from a truck onto a ship and then back onto another truck on the other side of the ocean. No unpacking, no repacking, no hands touching the cargo for the entire journey across the water. That single afternoon in New Jersey quietly rewired global trade forever. Within 20 years, every major port on Earth had been rebuilt from the ground, up around standardized 20-foot and 40-foot containers. Trains, trucks, cranes, and ships all started speaking the same exact dimensional language for the first time in history. The cost of shipping a pair of shoes across the Pacific Ocean dropped to a few cents per pair. And here is the part you have been touching your whole life without ever knowing it. The phone in your hand right now, the shoes on your feet, the mug your morning coffee is sitting in, the chair you are sitting in at this exact moment, the screen you are watching this video on. Almost all of it crossed an ocean inside one of those metal boxes on top of one of those ships. Roughly 90% of everything traded in the world moves by sea. The reason a television costs $300 instead of $3,000 is partly the engineering of a ship most people will never once set foot on in their lifetime. But this system is not invincible. Not even close to it. Containers do fall off these ships. Estimates suggest hundreds, sometimes more than 1,000 boxes a year tumble into the ocean during heavy storms, especially across the rough winter waters of the North Pacific. Most sink to the bottom in just minutes. Some float for years and become hazards to smaller boats and fishing vessels. Stack collapses, where an entire tower of containers buckles mid-voyage, are rare, but devastating when they happen. And they almost always trace back to weight declarations being wrong on paper somewhere down the long supply chain. Then, there is the bottleneck problem. In March of 2021, a single container ship called the Ever Given wedged itself sideways in the Suez Canal and froze about 12% of global trade for nearly a full week. The ship was so large that the canal could barely contain it on a normal day. As container ships keep getting bigger every single year, the number of ports and canals that can actually handle them keeps shrinking on the map. The vessels are pushing hard against the very limits of the infrastructure built to support them. And then there is the fuel question. These ships mostly burn a thick, heavy oil called bunker fuel. It is cheap, it is energy dense, and it is brutal on air quality near coastlines. The shipping industry is in the middle of a slow, expensive transition toward cleaner fuels and electrified ports. But the scale of the change is enormous, and the timeline is measured in decades, not years. So here's where you actually land after all of this. You came in thinking a cargo ship was a floating rectangle, a big metal box with smaller metal boxes stacked on top of it. What is actually happening is a moving conversation between physics and engineering. A steel hull that bends like a fishing rod through a storm. A computer-arranged stack of city bus-sized boxes locked together with steel rods and twist locks. Millions of gallons of seawater pumped into the belly of the ship to lower its center of gravity and let it rock back upright like a weighted bobber after every single wave. A century of trial and error since one man loaded 58 boxes onto one tanker in New Jersey and accidentally redesigned the entire world economy in a single afternoon. That ship you saw sitting on the horizon last summer isn't a vehicle in the way you thought it was. It is a floating warehouse that has learned to agree with the ocean instead of fight it. But here is the thing nobody ever stops to ask. How does a ship this enormous, with no brakes, moving 25 miles per hour through open water, actually come to a complete stop and then back itself into a parking spot only a few feet wider than its own hull? That is an entirely different physics problem. And the answer involves tugboats, sideways thrusters, and a maneuver that looks impossible until you understand the trick behind it. Subscribe